All right, everyone, let's get this party started. Welcome, class, to Classics 160B1, Meet the Ancients! I, of course, am your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we are going to start looking at the great civilizations of the ancient Near East. So that is our plan for today. We are going to kind of pick up where we left off last time, right? With the, well, I guess we'll start with the origin of the universe again, but then we'll see how we get from there all the way up to the complexity that arises with the Bronze Age. All right, so let's go ahead and bring up the projector here. Let's turn down the lights and get ready for Lecture 2.1, The Rise of Civilization. So here is what we have on the docket for today. We're going to start with a few announcements. I'm going to give you a reminder about your first homework assignment this Friday. What we'll usually do at the beginning of each class is take it back to kind of the main points that we covered from the previous lecture. And the idea there is twofold. One is to really build a smooth connection between that and today's new material. And two is to kind of re-highlight for you what those important points were from the previous lecture. Then we're going to move into something called the Neolithic Revolution. We'll talk a little bit about why it's such a revolution, the things that are the things that constitute the Neolithic Revolution aren't particularly exciting, but they have a huge, monumental impact that still influences development today. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll get in to kind of what we call civilization with the Bronze Age empires of the ancient Near East. So that is the plan for today. All right, what do we have in terms of announcements? Okay, so you guys know the basic ones, right? Go ahead and put it into speaker view if it's not there already. That will allow you to see me. It'll allow you to see the slides, see the text. If you have any trouble seeing the text, I'm going to post all of these as YouTube videos after the class. They tend to be a little bit higher resolution than what you actually get on Zoom, so you can always go back and check those for any text that you might not be able to see here. In terms of new announcements, your first homework assignment is due this Friday. We are going to close today with kind of an introduction to the historical context of the texts that you're going to be reading for Friday. Okay, so you're having a basic idea of what's going on when you read these things. And what I'm going to have you do is read some sources that were written a little more than 3,000 years ago, and you're going to decide who won a battle, all right? And this battle is particularly interesting because it's the first battle ever in all of history where we have a play-by-play account of what actually happened, all right? So really, really cool stuff. All right, so we'll talk more about that. Honors students, if you're interested in pursuing an honors contract, I'm gonna have the information for that ready for you on Friday. What you're gonna be doing for that is how would I phrase this? We're going to be looking at the ancient Greek site of Delphi, right? If you've heard of the Oracle of Delphi, this is the place. And what we're going to be doing is recreating that site through 3D modeling. And then once we've created the site, we're going to kind of all together, using a virtual reality headset, walk through the site, and you guys are going to give presentations, all right? Now, if you don't have experience doing any of that, no problem at all. I don't either. Okay, so the goal is going to be for us to learn some of these things together and then try to experience the site. And if for anybody else who's not in the Honors College but thinks that's super awesome, you can have the ability to participate as well. And what you can do is basically use that as a jumping off point for your final project for the class. Okay, so those are the announcements for today. All right, so let's go ahead and go way back to the beginning, all right? So you guys heard a little bit about this last time, and you watched the video in preparation for today's class. But the goal of this, right, to talk about this very, very early universal history is to give you guys a sense for the context, right, for the big picture context in which humanity both arises and then produces these cultural developments that we're going to talk about in this class. And one of the big takeaway points is that for a really, 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 really long time, not much happens in terms of humanity, all right? Even once we get humans, they don't do very much. And then in these last 5,000 years or so, there's been a monumental explosion in terms of what we've been able to produce. So, Big Bang, right, going all the way back 13.7 billion with a B years ago. We know that because we can measure this kind of cosmic microwave background radiation and the rate of expansion of the universe now, and we can trace it all the way back, right, kind of working backwards to this finite little point that we know is the singularity, and we've been expanding ever since. So we're going to fast forward 9 billion years, right? That brings us to the origin of Earth itself about 4.5 billion years ago. You guys are very, very lucky you were not around for that event. It was a very inhospitable place to live early on. The atmosphere was made of like sulfur. You couldn't breathe. You were constantly being bombarded with space junk and asteroids and things like that. Amazingly, we do think that life arose relatively quickly after the origin, after kind of Earth was created, something around 4 billion years ago, but it was really tiny. Again, don't get the paleontologists involved on this one, but life wasn't doing a lot back then. Okay, so that's our context to start here. We get modern humans arising somewhere in the range of 200,000 years ago, all right? And there are new discoveries kind of happening all the time. And what archaeologists love to do more than anything, well, they like to go to the beach and they like their wine. But after that, the next thing that they love the most is claiming that they have the first something. And so when it gets to the first example of Homo sapiens, we're constantly in this process of pushing the date back further and further and further. There's a general consensus that it was something around 200,000 years ago. Although there was a new discovery last year, somebody claiming 300,000 years. If you have a ballpark number around 200,000 years ago, you're going to be in good shape here. And when you do the math on this, right, what that means is that our species has been around for something like 0.001% of the history of the universe, right? So everything we've created has happened in 0.001% of the span of universal history. Now, one of the other takeaway points here is that for most, not just of universal history, but for most of human history, not a lot happens. All right? So, in these early days, for the first 190,000 years of human existence, right, people do more or less the same thing, okay? And what they do is they wander around looking for food, right? Looking to hunt animals or scavenge, or not scavenge, but hunt animals or collect fruit and nuts and things like that. They look to procreate, and they try not to get eaten by saber-toothed tigers, all right? Now, along the way, they do kind of invent a couple things, right? So art comes out during this time around 30 or 40,000 years ago. Burials start around 100,000 years ago, and archaeologists debate the meaning of those burials. But for most people, all over the world, life is relatively similar, right? You spend your time trying to look for food, trying to make babies, and trying to not get eaten by saber-toothed tigers. Again, that's 190,000 years out of 200,000 years of human history. Okay, so we move now to the Neolithic Revolution, the thing that changes the trajectory of human history more than anything that had come before it, right? So things like art, things like burials, right? Those were important contributions, but they don't really change the overall arc of kind of where people are headed and what they're doing that sort of thing. All right, so this begins around 12,000 years ago, okay? Around 10,000 BCE. We're going to kind of start transitioning now from years ago, which like paleontologists often use, paleontologists often use that. Geologists use years ago, that sort of thing. Now to BCE and CE. And in case you're unfamiliar with the terminology, so one of the things that historians have done over the last few decades is they try to get away from dating things based on kind of religious events, right? Which you have with BC, before Christ, and AD, Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. And so they come up with BCE, which stands for before the Common Era, which just happens to coincide with exactly like BC, and CE, which stands for the Common Era, which is essentially the same as AD. So when you see those things, just kind of keep that in mind. BCE is basically BC, CE is essentially AD. Okay, so about 12,000 years ago, things start to change. And in large part, this change is the result of climatic change. So the world gets a little bit warmer. As a result of things being warmer, plants, not farming, but plants just kind of naturally grow a little bit more. What this means is that it's easier for people to feed themselves. And it also reduces some of the areas where kind of, tundra-based megafauna, right? Woolly mammoths who really like the cold. It reduces the area that they can go, kind of making them easier to hunt. And we start to see a decrease in the population of these very, very large animals. All right, so here's what ends up happening then, all right? So people are increasing. The population is increasing. The number of large animals that there are to hunt as a result is decreasing. The weather is getting warmer. Because you have more people, what starts to happen is, okay, so what you've been doing for 190,000 years, right, is you've been chasing your woolly mammoths around, right? You've got your spear, you're ready to chase your woolly mammoths. And all of a sudden, when you start to do that, you're following your woolly mammoths and you bump into another group. And you hadn't seen that group of people before, but there are more people now. And the other group they're like, no, those are our woolly mammoths. Get out of here. And so eventually, right, as populations increase, people start to realize that all it takes is a little bit of work to tend to the things that are already growing, right? Planting a few seeds, doing a little extra watering, and all of a sudden, you have the ability to kind of grow your own crops. You don't have to chase food anymore. All of a sudden, you have the ability to start producing your own food. All right, so people settle down in one place, they start farming, and then shortly after that, they start using certain types of animals to start doing the work for them. All right, so they start doing that, and then they start breeding animals. This is what we call animal husbandry. They start selectively breeding animals that are particularly good for eating, for producing things like milk, and for doing things like labor. So when it comes to the Neolithic Revolution, these things down here are the major contributions, all right? It's people settling down in one place, it's people beginning to farm, and it's people beginning to breed animals, right? Domesticate animals. And these small changes tend to have very, very large scale, very important results. And let's go ahead and take a look at why this is the case. All right, so this is what's known as a positive feedback loop here, all right? And what ends up happening once you settle down is that you're able to build up a food surplus, right? So the food that you don't eat during a given season, you can store in one place. And you can think about this, right? So think about this in terms of looking backwards towards hunters and gatherers, right? Let's say you kill a woolly mammoth. it's really difficult to carry all of that stuff with you. No matter how much food you have at any given time, you are limited by the amount that you can basically carry yourself, right? You and your group can carry. Now, when you're settled in one place, all of a sudden, you can start to store food. So you build up a food surplus, right? And what that allows for is stability. And so think about this, right? So some seasons are really good, some years are really good and productive, some are not. Sometimes you have a drought, sometimes things freeze, right? And all of a sudden, instead of like dying, which you would have done back before the Neolithic Revolution, all of a sudden you've got this food that you've built up and saved, and now you can continue on, all right? So what this allows for, right? You've got your surplus of food. That allows for stability when it comes to food. And that allows for more people, all right? So you've got more food, that leads to more people. And eventually, what this allows for is having more people means you can have a very, very small part of the population not involved in food production, okay? So remember, for 190,000 years, everybody is out there trying to get food, all right? And now we have just a very small part of the population that doesn't have to do that. And when they can focus their efforts on something else, they come up with all sorts of really cool stuff. New ways to produce food, new ways to build houses, new ways to store food, right? These are what we call technological advances. And when you have those technological advances, guess what? You can have more food. And then when you have more food, you can have more stability. And when you have more stability, you can have more population. And more population leads to greater specialization. That leads to even more technological advances, which leads to more food, which leads to more stability. And around and around and around we go, right? And this is why we call it a positive feedback loop, because it doesn't stop, all right? Where we are today in terms of producing computers and rocket ships and all sorts of really awesome stuff is a result of a few people 12,000 years ago deciding to start adding a little bit of water to the plants that were already growing there, building a little fence around the animals that they had, and starting this process. Okay? So the Neolithic Revolution, keep in mind what the main attributes are. Make sure you have those written down, right? Settling down in one place, farming, animal husbandry, or domestication of animals. And then you don't need to remember each like kind of particular step or the exact name here, but you should be able to explain the general process. You should be able to explain why settling down in one place leads to this kind of feedback loop, which leads to technology and more food and more specialization. Okay, now, one of the main sites we're going to talk about today is a site known as Catalhoyuk. All right, so this is a Turkish word right here because the site's in modern day Turkey. And this flourished somewhere around 10,000 years ago, a little after 10,000 years ago, from around 7,500 to 5,700 BCE. And this is an artist's reconstruction of what the site looked like. But it's relatively large, all right? We're talking over the course of a couple thousand years. We go from like the first person starting to farm to sites where 5,000 to 10,000 people are living. And what you're going to notice from the reconstruction, kind of one of the important takeaway points here, is that even though, I mean, the population is for real pretty large for the pre-modern world, but everybody's kind of sort of the same, right? So each family has their little house. When you look at the site, it's kind of all just a like conglomeration of houses. There's not a lot of what we'd call differentiation between people. All right? So the Neolithic, when we think of that, it's characterized by the farming and settlements and animal domestication, but it's also characterized by a lack of differentiation between people. Okay, so people are still living pretty similar lives here. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at what changes. So when we talk about the rise of civilization, what we're talking about is a period of time that archaeologists and historians call the Bronze Age, right? This is not the most creative term ever. It's because they obviously started using bronze. But what we're going to talk about here are a bunch of other characteristics of this period of history that actually a lot of them are more important than the whole bronze thing, all right? But when we talk about the rise of civilization, what we're talking about is the rise of social complexity. And again, just to go back to where we were, people are getting together in groups, populations are getting bigger, but everybody's kind of the same during the Neolithic. And when we get to the Bronze Age, what's going to happen is that people really start doing different things. And we start building these kind of hierarchies within society that we call stratification. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some of the characteristics here. So one of the big characteristics of the Bronze Age is urbanization, right? That's the process of living in cities. And let's go ahead, this is the city of Uruk, okay, in modern day Iraq. It's a Sumerian city. Again, this is an artist's reconstruction here. But we can tell a couple things. For one, the cities get much bigger than they were. So they grow by 10 times the size of the biggest city in the Neolithic. Second, what you can tell, remember back to the Catalhoyuk picture? Everything was kind of the same. Now all of a sudden you have really different stuff, right? You've got this huge building in the middle, you've got large public spaces, you've got these other public buildings, you've got places for people to gather, you've got houses that surround it on the outside over here, right? So it's partially an increase in the size and density of people, but it's also the advent of people kind of separating out where they're living into areas that do different things. And so we can kind of look at the comparison here again, right? So over here on the left, we have Catalhoyuk, right? Again, fairly large, but everything's kind of sort of the same. And when we move over here to the Bronze Age city of Uruk, we see a differentiation in the type of space, in the type of architecture, and in the general scale of things. Okay, so first characteristic of the Bronze Age, of what we call the rise of civilization, we have urbanization in cities. Next up, we've got the rise of political hierarchy. Okay, so what ends up happening in the Neolithic, that time where farming was invented, again, everybody's kind of doing the same thing. You get a couple people involved in other stuff, but not too much. This really changes during the Bronze Age, during this period that starts around 3000 BC, okay? Now, political hierarchy emerges, and there's a lot of debate as to why this occurs. And there's a reason I have the picture of Egypt here, and we're going to look at Mesopotamia a little bit later in today's lecture. But think about the defining characteristics of these regions. In Egypt, it's the Nile River. In Mesopotamia, it's the Tigris and Euphrates. Both of these areas are built around river valleys, right? The river is the core thing here. And what ends up happening when you have a river is that you can do things to it to make farming even more productive, right? That's the process that we call irrigation, right? You can irrigate a river and that improves your ability to produce food. Okay, so think about this for a second, right? Why would, and feel free to throw some answers in the chat here. I guess I kind of got the answer on there, kind of, sort of. But the question is, right, why does irrigation lead to political hierarchy? And I got a good answer in the chat here, right? The idea is that you need people to actually do the work, right? Digging out irrigation canals and stuff like that. But you also need somebody to organize the project as a whole in order to make the region productive, you need somebody to actually do the organization. And that sort of organizational power, right, the person who becomes the organizer, they end up kind of eventually turning into what we call the political elite. And then over time, that political elite, well, they decide that it shouldn't just be about like they're in charge because they're, digging the canals or organizing the canals. They're in charge because the gods told them they should be in charge. And if they're in charge, their kids should be in charge. And eventually, over time, this hierarchy becomes hereditary. All right, good. So the idea of large-scale projects, monumental architecture, irrigation, that sort of thing, you need somebody to organize those. And those organizers eventually become the political elite over here. Now, along with this, we get kind of the rise of religious hierarchy as well, right? So this comes out of these political leaders trying to justify why they should get to be in power, right? So it kind of makes sense that you need somebody to organize something like a large-scale irrigation project. But once that's done, how do you stay in power, right? And the answer is you're like, oh, the gods said that I should be in power, and also my whole family, and also my best friends. And so this too becomes a kind of a core part of Bronze Age societies and a way for political elites to legitimize their power. One of the other Bronze Age characteristics, we get war becoming much, much bigger than it had ever been before. So through all of human history, right, there's been conflict, right? There's been kind of armed conflict. In large part prior to the Bronze Age, it was pretty small. Now all of a sudden, you've got better weapons, you've got larger populations, you've got people organizing these things, and eventually you get professional armies. You get groups saying that, hey, we're just going to take some portion of our population and make them soldiers, and that's going to be what they do. And so the scale, maybe the frequency of conflict might be reduced, but the scale of conflict greatly increases. And all of these things lead to the process of socioeconomic stratification. You don't need to know the exact kind of words on here, but the general idea is what's important. So now all of a sudden you've got soldiers and you've got priests, you've got political leaders, you've got artisans and builders. And then at the bottom, right, you've got people who do the food production. They tend to be down towards the bottom of these kind of socioeconomic pyramids. And in different times in different places, sometimes that's free laborers. Sometimes it works on kind of like a serf-like system, right, where you live on somebody's land and you have to give them some of what you produce. Sometimes it's built on slave labor in different places. But the idea of this kind of social complexity leads to this process of stratification, right? So when we're looking at the Bronze Age and we're looking at the different characteristics, a few of the things we've talked about, right? Urbanization, we've talked about political hierarchy, priesthoods and religious hierarchy, and that all, professional warfare, and that all feeds into this kind of rise of socioeconomic stratification. And this is really interesting if you step back and you think about it a little bit. It's kind of interesting to think, is this a good thing or a bad thing, right? You could kind of envision it both ways, right? Where on the one hand, these people are producing more than had ever been produced before, right? The total amount of goods produced is vastly higher than it was in previous periods. At the same time, you've got people at the top of this pyramid that are really benefiting in a disproportional way to the people at the bottom of the pyramid. So that's just kind of there's not a particular answer to that, but it's the start of one of these interesting questions that we still grapple with today, right? When we think about things like socioeconomic inequality in modern American society. One of the other new things that we get with the Bronze Age is monumental architecture. So remember back to Catalhoyuk, right? The place with all the different houses built together. They're all just houses. Nothing except houses. Now all of a sudden, we've got really cool, huge buildings, right? In Egypt, we've got pyramids. In the Near East, we've got ziggurats. We'll look at one of those in a second. In Greece, we get the rise of fortresses at sites like Mycenae, which you're looking at on the right-hand side. Palaces on the island of Crete. This is the Palace of Minos at Knossos. But we've got really big, monumental buildings for the first time in human history. And we've also got technological and artistic innovation, right? So during the Bronze Age, technology, we do get bronze. It's important. It's not as important as some of the other things, I think, but we do get bronze, right? We've got artistic developments, right? Sculpture, painting, that sort of thing. We've got the bust of Nefertiti over here. We've got a statue of Gilgamesh. We get the wheel for the first time very early on. We got the development of ceramics. That actually happens at the end of the Neolithic, but we'll just kind of lump it in with the Bronze Age for right now. But a lot of interesting developments, again, all of which help the food production process, which then continues that feedback loop. And then finally, we get the birth of writing, all right? So we don't often think of writing as a technology, but writing, I would argue, right? Out of all the things we've talked about, we shouldn't call it the Bronze Age, we should call it the writing age, right? And so early on, the first two places we get writing are in Mesopotamia, in modern day like Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates. So we've got cuneiform over here. We've got Egyptian hieroglyphs down in the Nile River Valley. This is happening around 3000 BC, so about 5,000 years ago. Right at the same time, we're starting to get these larger cities. About 1,000 years later, we start to get our first texts in the Aegean world, first with Linear A, which people still haven't really translated, and then later with Linear B, which we have translated. We just did that like 60 years ago. But now we can read these very, very early texts from Greece. This is, again, hundreds of years before Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey and that sort of thing. So I want to hear in the chat, somebody throw at me some reasons. Why is writing so important? Why does Dr. Rob think that we should call this the writing age rather than the Bronze Age? Like, why is this the one thing out of all the things that we've talked about that, like, I think helps that feedback loop more than anything else? All right, let's see what we got. Records history. All right, that's good. Why is history important? Like, why would that matter? Wouldn't you think bronze tools would be more important than like being able to write down history? Telling stories, that's good. Knowledge is power, okay? So if you hold that, you can kind of justify your political position, express ideas, teach new generations. Okay, there's a good one. I'm gonna jump on that one. So one of the people in there said, like, you're able to teach new generations techniques like irrigation, right? And I think generally this is the key idea here. So remember how with the Neolithic, when I was talking about food, like one of the big deals with farming was that you could like store stuff and you could keep it for later, right? Writing is kind of sort of the same thing. Prior to writing, you had to somehow keep all knowledge in your brain, okay? And when you were done with your knowledge in your brain, you had to tell somebody else all that knowledge and they had to keep it in their brain. And if the knowledge ran out of your brain, it was gone forever, okay? With writing, all of a sudden, you don't have to keep it in your brain anymore, right? If anybody's watched Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, there is a great moment in the middle of the movie where, you know, Indiana Jones has this Grail diary, but the Nazis have taken the Grail diary, and he like wants to move on with the quest, and his dad, played by Sean Connery, is like, we have to go get the diary. And Indiana Jones is like, no, that's a terrible idea. That's like, we're not going into the Nazis' den to get this diary. Let's just move on. Don't you remember what you wrote down in there? And Indiana Jones's dad is like, I wrote it down so I didn't have to remember. And that is the core idea of what we're talking about here, right? All of a sudden, all these developments, you can write them down and you can preserve them for future generations. And the idea, again, that idea is something that's still at the core of what we've got today in terms of being able to transmit knowledge over time, right? So when you think about how much information we have and computer storage and all that, the amount of information we can save without having to keep it in our actual brain at a given time is immense, and really what allows for a lot of the growth today. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into actual Bronze Age empires. We're going to do attendance in just a couple minutes, so hang tight there. Maybe get your D2L ready and get to the quizzes. We'll do that in just a second. And when we look at Bronze Age empires, remember the term Bronze Age is what we call this period. It's from about 3000 BC to 1200 BC, okay? So jot that down somewhere on your like cuneiform tablet or something like that. 3000 BC to 1200 BC is our time period for the Bronze Age. And today we're going to look at this period in Mesopotamia. And we've got a map here, and when we say the word Mesopotamia, what we're talking about actually is the middle of the rivers. Okay, so Mesopotamia is a Greek word, meso meaning middle, like Potamos or Potamia meaning rivers, very literally the middle of the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And because of this, right, because the rivers provide really good resources for farming, this becomes one of the hubs of early civilization. Okay, now, the first group we're going to talk about are known as the Sumerians, and they're just down in the southeast here, right? Right near the Persian Gulf down here in modern-day Iraq. And they kind of flourish from around 3000 BC to around 2300, right? Shortly before 2300 BC. And they're kind of the earliest large civilization in this region. Now, when you think of the Sumerians, what I want you to think about is almost something like the Greeks later on. And the reason I say that is that the Sumerian culture is a bunch of individual city-states, okay? So they share a language, and they share a culture, and they share a religion, and they share some like technology and cultural beliefs and stuff like that. But each city-state is independently governed, right? We're not thinking of the Sumerians like an empire where it's one group ruling everything. And it's within this culture that we get one of the largest cities of the time, right? This city of Uruk. This is like a recreation of what it would have looked like shortly after 3000 BC. And again, we're talking something on the scale of 50,000 or more people. And when we get to later literary characters like Gilgamesh, they set him as an early king in this city of Uruk. And we already talked a little bit about this, so we don't need to go back into it in too much depth here. But again, what I want you guys to kind of keep in mind are when we look at these cities, when we look at the sites of like Catalhoyuk over here and Uruk over here, it really exemplifies some of the big changes that come about when we move from the Neolithic on the left to the Bronze Age on the right. Stratification, specialization, different types of spaces, monumental architecture, that sort of thing. And we can see some of these ziggurats, right? So these kind of pyramidal type things in the Near East are known as ziggurats. They're these kind of stepped pyramids that held both political and a religious meaning, all right? So these would have both been the kind of home of the ruler as well as like one of the main kind of temples for the gods. And you can see the actual remains of these over here on the left-hand side. This is what it looks like today. This is what people think it would have looked like in antiquity. So again, this is one of the earliest versions of monumental architecture in the Near East. We already talked a little bit about how one of the major developments, right, is the development of a both kingship and a priesthood. And in this region, these are combined into one thing, all right? So we have what's known as a theocracy. And this comes again from the Greek word meaning God and power, right? But it's basically political power derived from God. The way that political rulers are justifying their right to rule is that they've been chosen by the gods or they've descended from the gods to do so, okay? And so that's kind of the mechanism used for again, justifying political power early on. Now, one of the interesting things is that very early on, for the first few hundred years, writing is all about record keeping. Okay, so you read the really, really early cuneiform tablets, it's mainly record keeping. And it's somewhere around 2000 BC that we start getting stories for the first time. And that very, very early story is known as the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? So Gilgamesh is one of these legendary early leaders of the city of Uruk. And originally it's a bunch of different stories that then later get combined into one kind of giant epic of him befriending this kind of wild animal person Enkidu, and then going off on a series of adventures to fight wild beasts and eventually look for everlasting life, which he doesn't succeed. But Gilgamesh is very similar to a Greek hero we get later on, and that, of course, is our main man, Heracles. So go ahead and take 2 minutes now. What I'd like you guys to do is take 2 minutes, get on D2L, go to Attendance Quiz 1, and select Orange, okay? So you're gonna need to select Orange for today's attendance, and if you select Orange, you're gonna get the question right, and if you choose Orange, you will then get your attendance credit for today. So, good beefy Heracles looking orange today. Oh, somebody asked what the color was. The color is orange. It might say orange on there, but I think we all know it's orange. Today's drink of the day is Vitamin Rain Zero. When you want the refreshing hydration of vitamin water, but not the overpriced cost. Yeah, I'm a Costco guy. I'm a Costco guy through and through. Okay, I'll give you 1 more minute to select orange, and then we will finish off with today's class. If you do have any issues with the attendance quiz, right, for the first week or something, you know, sometimes it takes a little while to get there, shoot your TA a message. TAs, again, if they shoot you a message during class like this, feel free to just go in and give them a point. One of the things is that there's a time limit on it, so if they like opened it at the beginning of class, it might have timed out or something like that. No problem, we can give them credit. Just email your TA. TAs, keep a list of people, and then you can go in and give them credit afterwards. A Celsius drink. I've never even heard of a Celsius. What's a Celsius drink? Anyway, somebody put in there what a Celsius drink is, and I'll consider it if it's reasonably priced and I can buy it from Costco. Anyway, okay, let's move on and get back to other things that these Sumerians are developing, science and technology. We kind of talked about that already. Where we go from here. okay, is we move from the Sumerians, right, who are the first kind of major culture, but they're all politically independent, over to the Akkadians, all right? And the Akkadians are a big deal because they are the first group that's really an empire in the sense that it's a single political power that's ruling the entire region. And out of the Akkadians, the guy to remember is the name of Sargon the Great, right? So we can see a statue of Sargon the Great over here. And he was remembered for thousands of years afterwards as like the most badass military conqueror that ever existed. So like the Old Testament Bible, which we think was written down maybe 1,500 years, 1,000 to 1,500 years after Sargon, they like recall this dude from 1,000 years before as like this incredible legendary conqueror. And you can see an example of that over here, right? He had neither rival nor equal. His splendor over the lands is diffused. He crossed the sea in the east. And then eventually he turns Kalamazoo into a ruined heap so that there was not even a perch for a bird left. So Sargon the Great, right, the first real military conqueror, taking all the lands and uniting them under a single political power. But it doesn't last. And one of the things that we get in the Near East is it's different types of groups that take over, right? So the Sumerians and then the Akkadians and then the Babylonians. And you don't need to know the specific dates here. Don't worry too much about memorizing those. But realize there is a lot of turnover in this region. And when it comes to the Babylonians, right, the guy to remember is Hammurabi. And if you've ever heard of an eye for an eye, right, he's known for the development of a law code. And the reason a law code is so important, think about that for a second, why a law code is so important. And the reason is, now everybody has to play by the rules that are written down. Now the rules are totally unfair, right? The law code does kind of say an eye for an eye, but like if you're a rich dude and like a poor dude does something to you, you can do an eye for an eye. But if you're a poor dude and a rich guy does something to you, it's not like he just gives you some money and that's it. So it's not really an eye for an eye the way we kind of think about it. But the fact that the laws are written down, at least like it means that people have to abide by those. Previously, the rich guy would have been like, oh, well, I just changed the law and I'm not going to do anything. So now there's something where everybody has to play by the same sorts of rules. And then eventually in the end, we get the Hittites out in, my slide go? I don't know where my slide went. We get the Hittites out in modern day Turkey. All right, so they are based at the site of Hattusa, which is in central Turkey. Again, it holds around 50,000 people, something like that. It's really cool because we have these archives left over from it. The Hittites are a very war-heavy people. They invent the war chariot, right? You can imagine engaging in warfare in the ancient world and seeing horses running at you with people wheeled chariots on the back firing arrows at you. They're the first ones to use iron, right? So they've now got iron weapons. And they get into a battle with the Egyptians. And this is what you're reading for Friday. The battle between the Egyptians and the Hittites, known as the Battle of Kadesh. So the Hittites are up here in purple. The Egyptians are down here. Over time, the Egyptians move north and east. The Hittites move south and east. And they clash right around here, all right? And what's super cool about this is A, it's the world's first chariot battle. B, it's the world's first battle where we have a play-by-play of what happened. And C, you guys are going to read the results of both sides. We have the Hittite account and we have the Egyptian account. So what you're going to do is you're going to read through these things. They're really difficult to get through, but give it your best shot. And you're going to tell me who won this battle and why. All right, so do that, read the sources, write the response, submit it on D2L. And you're going to be in good shape for Friday. Get that done before class on Friday. All right, everyone, it's been a great class. Good stuff. Have a wonderful couple days. Have some fun reading those sources, and I will see you back here on Friday. All right, bye, everyone.